Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a report that was, or a series of reports, but one in particular that talks about how the entire Western world has been transformed from a once very competitive, dynamic, innovative, invention type economy, or series of economies, into now just being effectively a crony capitalist monopoly, oligopoly, cartel type economy. Now, I've been sounding the warning on this for decades, and can't really get many people to take a whole lot of notice. But it's beyond dispute, well beyond dispute. So I'll talk about a few things. Now, I saw a thing in the United States where it's alleged only 12% of people under the age of 30 in the United States are married and have a mortgage. It doesn't say if they have children or not, just married and a mortgage. So one would say that was be a pretty decent basis for later on having children. But anyway, now, if we look at, say, in 1968, I think it was, the percentage of people under the age of 30 or under who were married and had a mortgage was 52% of the people. So now, and today it's 12%. So we can see just from that the astonishing difference in the socio-economic structural makeup of Western economies, and that's pretty much amplified throughout the rest of the Western world. Maybe some other countries a little bit behind the US, but in the timeline of things. But that's so 52% of people under the age of 30 were married with a house in 1968. 12% are today, and that's just wow. I mean, wow. Now, this is hardly surprising because the purchasing power of the paycheck has gone down the crapper, and depending on whose numbers you look at, somewhere between 75 and 90% of the purchasing power of the paycheck has disappeared since 1970 to today. And as I've mentioned many times in other videos, if I look at the very first apartment I rented compared to the same rent that's paid on that apartment today, which, by the way, back then had a garage, now it doesn't, then you're looking at something like 25-fold increase in the rent, whereas wages haven't even gone up half that amount over the time. So it's not hard to see where the purchasing power is gone. It's gone in the essentials of life, which is energy, accommodation, energy, and food. Now, that's pretty much all of it's there. If you look at consumer goods like televisions, things like that, they're relatively cheaper today in purchasing power terms than they were in 1970, as are things like computers. But the essentials of life are far more expensive than they were. Now, why is that so? And this is what this report on what's called the rentier, rentier, the rentier economies, which is, again, is an economist's term for passive income derived from doing not very much, but having a monopoly or an oligopoly. Now, rentier comes from the concept of someone just owns a lot of apartments or houses. They just rent them out and they don't have to do anything. They just sit back and watch the rental income flow in, so they don't have to build or create or innovate or invent anything. That is, so that's what most of the economies like today. If you look at the finance sector, insurance, finance, they're very well protected by government legislation. In many cases, you can't do business unless you have a fuckload of insurance policies, this sort of thing mandated. You just have to have them. If you don't have them, most organizations now won't, will insist on you must have the following insurances. And if you want to, open up a business or a kitchen or a mine site or anything, then you've supposedly got to have all these different insurances. So the insurance industry is just sitting back and watching the money flow in through the door, and it's mandatory in so many areas. For example, you can't drive a car unless you've got unless you've paid your insurance. You can't even register your car unless you've paid the insurance. And so it goes on and on. Finance, banking. You can't get a job unless you've got a bank account that they can deposit your pay in, for example. And then the bank collects money every time there's a transaction, and so millions of people are generating absolute passive income, easy profits of the bank. The banks need to do nothing. They sit there and watch that money, that river of gold, just rolling through the front door. When you look at the proportion of the economy in Australia, the report that I saw focused primarily on Australia, but looked at other Western countries. When you look at the structure of the economy and say, well, how much of the total economic activity is in through these, and effectively cartels, monopolies, oligopolies, and this rentier income, as it's called, passive do nothing, lazy income, then they're saying about 3/4 of the total economy. Now, the argument is that, or the theory put forward in these reports, which I 100% agree with, by the way, that unless that structural issue of the monopolies, oligopolies, cronyism, crony economy, unless that's addressed, you will never create the engine room of wealth and innovation and hard work that used to be. That if you worked hard and you did okay at school, you worked hard and did as you're told, you could do all right. Anybody, a factory worker, could buy a house and a modest house. It wasn't some waterfront mansion, but a modest house, and have 2.5 children and that sort of stuff. The basic entry level General Motors or Ford motor vehicle, or they could have a driving vacation in the summer and this sort of stuff. That's about that could be 100 million light years away today for a factory worker. So, and a whole series of things combined to reduce the purchasing power of the paycheck. Women going into the workforce, outsourcing of stuff to the third world, shutting down of manufacturing, all these sorts of things were issues, and then the concentration of money making in a crony economy sort of situation. Like why does a house? I remember going around a village, like one of those home show villages, and I remember it was kind of the entry level house, but it was a brick. It was 3 bedrooms. I guess you'd say somewhat modest, and 3 bedrooms. The kitchen, smallish dining room, 1 bathroom with bath, shower, sort of toilet combined. But it was comfortable. It was made of brick and this sort of thing. And this is when I was a kid. Now you could buy that house for less than $30,000. Now that house today is around $250,000 for that same house, and the price of land has gone up through the roof. I mean, how has it become that much more expensive? Now there's a small group of house builders that all do very nicely, thank you. And if you look at the monopoly on land sale, home building, banking, finance, insurance, energy, gas and oil, look at all these monopolies and oligopolies and cartels. That's where all the profit's going. So it's passive profit. These people don't have to invent anything, don't have to think of a new business idea or innovate a new technology. Far from it. They just have to sit back and watch the money roll in whilst they have a monopoly that's typically government protected. And some of the salaries that are being paid here are quite astonishing. These people who are sitting on top of these monopolies are paid millions, 10 million, 15 million, $20 million a year. But it's a fucking monopoly. I mean, what are they being paid to do? They go to cocktail parties or something. What are they being paid to do? And this inevitably leads to cronyism. When you get this much concentration of money, then these organizations become crony organizations where people in government say, I'd like you to give my daughter or son a nice job with lots of travel and something very prestigious and lots of. So you get the 18-year-old daughters who just left high school, 18-year-old daughters of politicians that are being given important saying jobs like executive senior consultant or something, and sent on these round the world trips. So then feeds off itself, and it becomes like some third world corrupt basket case economy that has gone down the crapper long ago. So that's what this report was talking about, saying that the purchasing power of the citizen will never be returned until these structural changes and these monopolies and cartels are broken up. And until that happens, the argument is, or the point that the report asserts, is that the West will be in an ever declining downward spiral of declining wealth, certainly for the citizenry, but then the obscene wealth of a very small elite at the apex. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.